The last thing I saw before I died was my adopted sister Sophie walking down the aisle in my wedding dress, wearing my engagement ring, marrying the man I had loved for 8 years. The second to last thing I saw was my parents in the front row, beaming with pride and joy, not even glancing at the hospital bed where I lay dying alone. I was 28 years old, and I was dying of heart failure because I had given Sophie my heart, literally. 6 months earlier, when she was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy and needed a transplant, I had been the perfect match. My parents didn't even ask if I wanted to donate. They simply told me it was my duty as her sister. That family took care of family, that I was being selfish for hesitating, so I gave her my heart, and in return, she took everything else, my fiancé, my future, my life. But then I opened my eyes and I was 12 years old again, standing in our living room on a bright September afternoon in 2007. My mother was smoothing down her dress nervously, and my father was checking his watch for the third time in as many minutes. "Victoria, stop fidgeting," my mother said sharply. "The social worker will be here any minute with Sophie. I want you on your best behavior." I stared at her, my heart, my perfectly healthy, intact heart, pounding in my chest. This was the day that would set everything in motion, the day my parents brought home the 7-year-old girl who would destroy my life. Except this time, I knew exactly what was coming, and I was going to change everything. My name is Victoria Chen, and I died at 28 after spending 16 years being gaslit, manipulated, and slowly erased by my own family. When I was 12, my parents, Richard and Margaret Chen, decided to adopt a child, not because they wanted another daughter, but because it looked good for my father's mayoral campaign. Family values, the campaign slogan had read. Building a better tomorrow, one child at a time. Sophie Lynn had been the perfect choice. 7 years old, doe-eyed and fragile-looking, with a tragic backstory that tugged at heartstrings. Her parents had died in a car accident, leaving her an orphan with no other family. The media ate it up. My father's approval ratings soared, and I, foolishly, had welcomed her with open arms. In my previous life, I had been so excited to have a little sister. I was an only child, lonely in our big house with parents who were always busy with political campaigns and charity events. Sophie seemed like a dream come true, someone to play with, to confide in, to share my life with. I had no idea she was a viper. It started small. Toys that went missing and turned up in Sophie's room. Homework that was mysteriously destroyed right before it was due. Friends who slowly stopped calling after Sophie told them I had said mean things about them. My parents never believed me when I tried to explain. Sophie was just a traumatized little girl who needed love and patience. I was the older sister who should know better than to make up stories about her. By the time I was 16 and Sophie was 11, she had perfected her act. She was the sweet, delicate, adopted daughter who tried so hard to fit in. I was the jealous, spoiled, biological daughter who resented having to share my parents' attention. When I was 20, I met James Park at university. He was everything I had ever wanted. Kind, ambitious, understanding. He came from a good family. He had a bright future in corporate law. And most importantly, he seemed to see me for who I really was, not the problem child my parents had labeled me as. We dated for 6 years before he proposed. I was ecstatic. Finally, I would have a family of my own, someone who chose me first, who loved me unconditionally. I should have known better. Sophie was 18 by then, a stunning beauty who had learned to weaponize her tragic backstory and delicate appearance. She enrolled at the same university where James worked as a junior professor. She started showing up at our apartment, crying about how hard college was, how she missed her late parents, how grateful she was to have such a wonderful sister and future brother-in-law. James, being the good person he was, offered to help her with her studies. I encouraged it. I wanted Sophie and James to get along. I still believed, despite everything, that we could be a real family. I was such a fool. The affair started 6 months before our wedding was supposed to happen. I found out by accident coming home early from a work trip to find them in our bed. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating that I couldn't even process it at first. Sophie cried and apologized and said it just happened, that she never meant to fall in love with him, that she tried to stay away, but the heart wants what it wants. James said he was sorry, that he had tried to fight his feelings, but he and Sophie had a connection that he and I had never had. My parents said I was being dramatic and selfish, that true love couldn't be denied, that I should be happy for my sister who had suffered so much in her life and deserved happiness. I called off the wedding. I tried to move on, but Sophie and James were everywhere, at family dinners, at my father's political events, in my parents' Christmas card photo where I was notably absent. And then Sophie got sick. The diagnosis came 2 years after she stole my fiancé, cardiomyopathy. Her heart was failing and she needed a transplant urgently. I was tested out of family obligation, and of course I was a perfect match. "It's fate," my mother said when the results came back. "This is your chance to prove you really love your sister, Victoria, to show that you've moved past your jealousy and pettiness." "I could die," I had said. "Heart donation is a fatal procedure. I would have to die for her to live." "You're being dramatic," my father snapped. "The doctors said you're a perfect match. Sophie needs this. Are you really so selfish that you'd let your sister die?" I tried to say no. I tried to stand my ground, but the pressure was relentless. The media got involved. My father's political enemies painted me as a monster who would let her sister die out of spite over a man. Strangers sent me death threats. My few remaining friends were told I was a terrible person. In the end, I agreed. Not because I wanted to, but because I was so worn down, so exhausted from years of being told I was the problem, that I couldn't fight anymore. The surgery was scheduled for the same day as Sophie and James's wedding. It should have been my wedding day, the date we had originally chosen. But instead of marrying James, I would be dying so Sophie could live to marry him. The last thing I heard before the anesthesia took me was my mother saying, "Thank goodness Victoria finally did something right for once." I died on the operating table. They took my heart and gave it to Sophie, and as my consciousness faded, I heard them wheeling me past the room where Sophie was being prepped for her transplant. She was on the phone with James. "I can't wait to marry you tonight," she was saying. "I'm finally getting everything I've ever wanted. And the best part? Victoria gave it all to me." She was laughing when I died, but now I was alive again, 12 years old, staring at my mother as she fussed with her hair before the social worker arrived. I had been given an impossible gift, a second chance to stop this nightmare before it started. "Victoria, are you listening to me?" my mother asked sharply. "I said stop fidgeting." "Sorry, Mom," I said automatically, then caught myself. In my previous life, I had always apologized, always tried to please them, always twisted myself into knots trying to be good enough. Not this time. The doorbell rang and my father rushed to answer it. I steeled myself as I heard voices in the foyer, the social worker's professional cheerfulness, and underneath it, a small, scared-sounding voice that I knew was all an act. Sophie Lynn walked into our living room, and I had to fight to keep my expression neutral. She looked so small and innocent, with her big brown eyes and her too thin frame, 7 years old, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit, looking around the room with perfectly calculated uncertainty. In my previous life, my heart had broken for her. This time, all I felt was cold fury. "Victoria, this is Sophie," my mother said, her voice warm in a way it never was when she spoke to me. "She's going to be your little sister. Isn't that wonderful?" "Hi, Sophie," I said, keeping my voice polite but distant. Sophie looked up at me with those enormous eyes, and I saw the exact moment she sized me up and decided on her approach. In my previous life, she had been sweet and shy, the perfect little sister who looked up to me. I wondered what she would do now that I wasn't giving her the warm welcome she expected. "Hi," she said softly, hiding behind her stuffed rabbit. Is it okay if I'm here? I don't want to be a bother." My mother rushed to reassure her. "Of course it's okay. You're part of our family now. Victoria, why don't you show Sophie your room? We thought you girls could share for now until we get Sophie's room set up." Share my room. I had forgotten about that. In my previous life, we had shared a room for 2 years while my parents decided on the best way to convert the guest room into Sophie's space. By the time they finally got around to it, most of my belongings had mysteriously ended up broken or missing, and Sophie had positioned herself as the victim of my jealousy. "Actually," I said carefully, "I think Sophie should have her own room right away. The guest room is perfect. It's already furnished, and it would help her feel like she really belongs here." My mother frowned. "Victoria, we discussed this. We want you girls to bond. I think Sophie might feel more comfortable having her own space," I persisted. "Moving to a new home is scary. Having her own room would give her somewhere to feel safe." I was gambling that my mother's need to appear like the perfect adoptive parent would override her desire to force us together. It worked. "That's very thoughtful of you, Victoria," my mother said, though her eyes were calculating. "Sophie, would you like your own room?" Sophie looked between us, and I could see her trying to figure out what answer would benefit her most. Finally, she nodded. "If that's okay. I don't want Victoria to think I'm taking over her space." Perfect victim behavior. I wanted to laugh. "Of course it's okay," my father boomed. "Richard Chen's household has plenty of room for everyone. Victoria, help Sophie bring her things upstairs." Sophie didn't have much. A small suitcase of clothes and the stuffed rabbit. As we walked upstairs together, she kept glancing at me with those calculating eyes. "Your house is really big," she said softly. "Much bigger than where I lived before." "I'm sure it must be hard, adjusting to everything being different," I said neutrally. "Do you think your mom and dad will really keep me?" Sophie asked, and her voice trembled perfectly. "Or will they send me back if I'm not good enough?" In my previous life, that question had made me rush to reassure her, to promise that she was part of our family forever. This time, I just shrugged. "I don't know. I guess you'll have to see." Sophie's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't the response she had expected. I showed her to the guest room and left her to unpack, ignoring my mother's pointed look that suggested I should stay and help her settle in. Instead, I went to my own room and locked the door. I needed to think. I knew everything that was going to happen over the next 16 years. Every manipulation, every lie, every way Sophie would systematically destroy my life. But I also knew that if I tried to warn my parents, they wouldn't believe me. I was 12 years old. How could I possibly convince them that their perfect adopted daughter was actually a sociopath? I needed to be smarter than I had been in my previous life. I needed to document everything, to build a case so solid that even my parents couldn't ignore it. But most importantly, I needed to protect myself and my future. Over the next few weeks, I watched Sophie work her magic on my parents. She was perfect, grateful but not obsequious, sweet but not cloying, traumatized but brave. My parents ate it up. Meanwhile, I kept my distance, polite but not warm, helpful but not eager to bond. My mother noticed. "Victoria, you're being very cold to your sister," she said one evening after Sophie had gone to bed. "She's trying so hard to fit in, and you're making her feel unwelcome." "I'm being polite," I said. "I'm just giving her space to adjust." "You're being selfish," my father said harshly. "We brought Sophie into this family, and you're acting like a spoiled brat who doesn't want to share her toys." "I'm 12, I pointed out. "How exactly am I supposed to act?" "Like a good big sister," my mother snapped. "Like someone who cares about others instead of just herself." I bit my tongue to keep from screaming that I knew exactly who Sophie really was, that I had literally died for her in another life, and this was how they repaid me. Instead, I just nodded and went to my room. The first week Sophie lived with us, she was the perfect angel. She helped with dishes without being asked, did her homework quietly, and thanked my parents effusively for every small kindness. I watched her performance with the eyes of someone who had seen this play before, and I knew it wouldn't last. The first incident came on a Saturday morning. I woke up to find my favorite necklace, a gift from my grandmother before she died, missing from my jewelry box. I found it an hour later in Sophie's room, tucked under her pillow. "I'm sorry," she cried when I showed it to my mother. "It was so pretty and I just wanted to try it on. I fell asleep and forgot I was wearing it." My mother sighed. "Sophie, you should have asked permission. But Victoria, try to understand. Sophie has never had nice things before. We need to be patient with her." "She stole from me," I pointed out. "She borrowed without asking," my mother corrected. "There's a difference." The next incident was more calculated. Sophie accidentally spilled juice all over my science project the night before it was due. When I accused her, she burst into tears. "I was just trying to help clean the table. I didn't see it there. I'm so clumsy and stupid and I ruin everything." My father had comforted her while I stayed up all night recreating my project, earning a lower grade because it wasn't as polished as the original. The third incident was even worse. Sophie told my best friend Emma that I had called her annoying and didn't want to be friends anymore. When Emma confronted me, crying, I had tried to explain that Sophie was lying, but Sophie had been so convincing, complete with fake text messages she'd created using a free app, that Emma believed her instead of me. I watched my social circle shrink as Sophie systematically poisoned every friendship I had, always with that innocent expression and those practiced tears. That's when I knew I needed to be smarter. I needed evidence that even my parents couldn't dismiss. The first major incident came a month after Sophie arrived. I came home from school to find my room destroyed, books torn apart, clothes shredded, my computer smashed. Sophie was in the hallway crying. "I tried to stop her," she sobbed to my mother, "but she was so angry and I didn't know what to do." My mother's face was stone when she turned to me. "Victoria Chen, what is the meaning of this?" In my previous life, I had protested my innocence. I had cried and sworn I didn't do it. My mother hadn't believed me, and I had been grounded for a month. This time, I pulled out my phone, a new one I had bought with my allowance and hidden from my parents. I had installed a security camera in my room, hidden in my bookshelf. "Let's check the footage," I said calmly. My mother's eyes narrowed. "What footage?" I pulled up the app and showed her. There, in perfect clarity, was Sophie entering my room with scissors and a hammer. The timestamp showed she had done it an hour before I got home from school. Sophie's crying intensified. "I didn't mean to. I was just so angry because Victoria has been so mean to me and I couldn't help it." "So you admit you did it?" I asked. I was upset. You've been making me feel so unwelcome and that's enough," my mother said sharply. But she was looking at Sophie now, not me. "Sophie, this is unacceptable behavior. You destroyed Victoria's belongings." "But she's been so mean to me," Sophie wailed. "She hates me." "I've been polite but distant," I corrected, which, according to my therapist, is a perfectly normal response to a major family change. That was a lie. I didn't have a therapist, but my mother didn't know that. "We'll discuss this later," my mother said. "Sophie, go to your room." As Sophie left, still crying, my mother turned to me. "And you? Putting a camera in your room without telling us? That's a violation of trust." "It's my room," I said. "I'm entitled to privacy, and clearly I needed the security." My mother looked like she wanted to argue, but the evidence was irrefutable. She settled for grounding us both for a week, me for the camera, Sophie for the destruction. But I had won the first battle. I had proof, and my parents couldn't just dismiss it. The next few years followed a similar pattern. Sophie would try to sabotage me, and I would have evidence ready. I documented everything: the times she stole from me, the lies she told about me, the ways she manipulated situations to make me look bad. My parents couldn't ignore all of it, though they tried. They sent Sophie to therapy, which she twisted into more ammunition against me. According to her therapist, whose notes my parents shared at family therapy sessions, Sophie was acting out because she felt rejected by her new sister and was desperate for love and acceptance. I kept my distance and focused on building my own life. I made friends outside our family sphere. I excelled at school. I prepared for the future I knew was coming. When I was 16 and Sophie was 11, James Park came into our lives. He was a student teacher at my school, 24 years old, charming and idealistic about education. He taught English literature with genuine passion, making Shakespeare and Wordsworth come alive in ways that made even the most disinterested students pay attention. In my previous life, I had developed a crush on him that had eventually turned into love. I had stayed after class to discuss books, volunteered to help him grade papers, found every excuse to be near him. He had been flattered but professional, maintaining boundaries until I was 18 and graduated. Then we had started dating, and I had thought I'd found my soulmate. This time, I knew better. "Hi, Victoria," he said cheerfully during our first class. "I'm Mr. Park, and I'll be your English teacher for the semester." I looked at him, handsome, charming, exactly as I remembered, and felt nothing but contempt. In another life, this man had betrayed me with my sister. In another life, I had loved him more than anything. In this life, I saw him clearly, someone who would choose the easier path, who would betray trust for convenience, who would take everything I offered and throw it away. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Park," I said politely, and turned my attention back to my notes. Over the weeks that followed, I could feel him trying to connect with me. He would call on me in class, compliment my insights, recommend books he thought I might enjoy. In my previous life, each of these gestures had made my heart race. Now they just made me tired. "Victoria, can I talk to you after class?" he asked one day, about a month into the semester. I stayed behind while the other students filed out. "I've noticed you seem very engaged with the material, but you don't participate in class discussions as much as I'd expect," James said. "Is everything okay? Are you comfortable in the class?" "Everything's fine, Mr. Park. I just prefer to listen rather than talk. In your essays, you have these brilliant insights. I'd love to hear you share them with the class. I'm more comfortable expressing myself in writing." He looked at me with confusion and something that might have been disappointment. "Fair enough. But if you ever want to talk about literature or books or anything, my door is always open." "Thank you, Mr. Park." I left, and I could feel his eyes on me as I walked away. Over the next 2 years, James seemed genuinely puzzled by my lack of interest. He would recommend books to me that in my previous life I had loved, books we had discussed for hours. Now I would politely decline or read them and offer only the most basic responses. When I was 18 and he was a junior professor, he asked me out. I said no. "Victoria, I've always felt there was something special between us," he said. "Maybe we could get coffee sometime and talk?" "I'm not interested," I said clearly. "You're a nice person, but I don't see you that way." James looked genuinely shocked. In my previous life, I had been the one pursuing him, working so hard to get his attention. Now that I wasn't interested, he seemed to find me fascinating. "Is it because of our age difference?" he pressed. "Because I waited until you were a legal adult specifically, so that wouldn't be an issue." "It's because I'm not interested," I repeated. "Please respect that." He did, reluctantly, but I noticed him watching me with confused longing at family events. My parents had maintained their friendship with the Park family, and James was often at our house for dinners and celebrations. Sophie, now 14, noticed his interest. I watched her pivot her strategy in real time. She had spent the past 7 years trying to destroy me through manipulation and lies, with mixed success thanks to my evidence gathering. But now she saw a new angle. If she couldn't make me miserable by destroying my reputation, she would make me miserable by taking what I wanted. The problem was, I didn't want James. But Sophie didn't know that. She started hanging around him at family events, playing up her innocent young girl act, asking him about college and his work and what it was like to be a professor. James, still confused about my rejection, seemed flattered by her attention. "Sophie really looks up to you," my mother said to me one evening. "It's nice that she has a positive male role model in her life." I said nothing. I was watching the long game play out, and I needed to be patient. When Sophie was 16, she enrolled at James's university. I had deliberately chosen a different school, one across the country where none of my family's drama could follow me. I studied business and psychology, building skills I knew I would need. I came home for Christmas break to find Sophie and James working together in our living room. She was supposedly getting tutoring for a difficult class. They were sitting very close together. "Victoria," Sophie said brightly, "I was just telling James how grateful I am that he's willing to help me. College is so much harder than I expected." "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said neutrally. James watched me with those confused eyes. "Victoria, can we talk? Privately?" I followed him to the study. "I don't understand you," he said. "You've been distant from me for years. Don't you feel what I feel? Don't you sense that we're meant to be together?" "No," I said simply. "But..." He ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "I've waited years for you. I respected your boundaries. I never pushed. And now you're just... nothing? You feel nothing?" "I don't love you, James. I never have. You're a nice person, but we're not compatible." "Sophie says you told her you were in love with me," he said. I went very still. "Sophie is lying." "Why would she lie about that?" "You'd have to ask her. But I promise you I have never been in love with you, and I never told Sophie otherwise." James looked genuinely distressed. "I don't understand. Why would she say that?" "Because Sophie is a liar and a manipulator who's been systematically trying to destroy my life since she was 7 years old," I said flatly. "That's a terrible thing to say about your sister. It's the truth. But you're not going to believe me, are you? You're going to believe sweet, innocent Sophie who's been traumatized by losing her parents and just wants to be loved." James's face hardened. "You're jealous of her." "I'm not jealous. I'm informed. There's a difference." I left him standing in the study and went back to school early, cutting my winter break short. I didn't need to watch the rest of this play out. I knew exactly what would happen. Sophie would confess her feelings to James. James, feeling rejected by me and flattered by her adoration, would eventually give in. They would start a relationship that they would hide from my parents at first. When it finally came out, my parents would be delighted, and I would be far away building my own life. Over the next 2 years, I built a successful career in business consulting. I made my own money, built my own network, and most importantly, I prepared for what I knew was coming. When I was 24, I got the call from my mother. "Victoria, we have some wonderful news. Sophie and James are getting married." "Congratulations to them," I said neutrally. "You don't sound surprised." "I'm not. I saw this coming years ago." There was a pause. "You're still holding on to that ridiculous grudge, aren't you? Claiming that Sophie is manipulative and dishonest when she's done nothing but try to be a good sister to you." "Mom, I'm happy for them. I have no feelings about James one way or another." "Then you'll come to the wedding?" "I'll check my schedule and let you know." I didn't go to the wedding. Instead, I spent that weekend finalizing the purchase of my first business, a consulting firm that specialized in background checks and due diligence for adoptive families. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 years after their wedding, Sophie called me herself. "Victoria, it's Sophie." Her voice sounded weak, frightened. "I need to talk to you about something important." "What is it?" "I'm sick. Really sick. They're saying it's cardiomyopathy and I need a heart transplant." I closed my eyes. Here it was, the moment I had been preparing for. "I'm sorry to hear that, Sophie. The thing is, I need a donor. A family member would be the best match. Will you get tested?" "No." Silence on the other end of the line. "What?" Sophie finally said. I said no. I won't get tested. But I'm your sister. I could die." You're not my sister. You're a woman my parents adopted who has spent the last 18 years trying to destroy my life. I have no obligation to you." "How can you be so cruel?" Sophie's voice rose hysterically. "I'm dying and I'm protecting myself, something I should have done a long time ago. I'll tell Mom and Dad. They'll make you." "I'm 26 years old, Sophie. They can't make me do anything, and quite frankly, I don't care what you tell them." I hung up. Within hours, my mother was calling exactly as I had expected. "Victoria Chen, I cannot believe how selfish you're being. Your sister is dying and you won't even get tested to see if you can help her?" "That's correct." "This is unacceptable. You will get tested, and if you're a match, you will donate. That's final." "No, I won't. And if you try to force me or manipulate me or use the media to pressure me, I will go public with every piece of evidence I have about Sophie's behavior over the past 18 years. Every lie, every manipulation, every piece of sabotage. I have documentation of all of it." "You're lying. Try me." There was a long pause. "You would really let your sister die?" "My sister is dying because she has a medical condition. That's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to fix. Sophie made choices her whole life, choices to lie, to manipulate, to hurt people. Those choices have consequences. I'm ashamed to call you my daughter. Good thing you have Sophie then." I hung up on my mother for the first time in my life. The pressure campaign started immediately. My father went to the media with the story of his cruel biological daughter, who would let her adopted sister die. Strangers sent me death threats. My business partners started getting calls asking if they knew what kind of monster they were working with. But I had prepared for this. I had built my business carefully, with people who knew me and trusted me. I had legal protection in place. And most importantly, I had evidence. When a particularly aggressive journalist cornered me outside my office, I smiled at her. "You want a story?" I asked. "Here's a story. I have 18 years of documented evidence showing that Sophie Lin systematically manipulated, lied to, and sabotaged me from the moment she entered my family. I have videos, recordings, witnesses, and therapy notes. I'm happy to share all of it with you if you're interested in the truth rather than just the easy narrative." The journalist's eyes lit up. "You're serious?" "Completely, but I should warn you, my father is a powerful man with a lot of connections. Publishing this story could end your career." She grinned. "Honey, I've been waiting my whole career for a story big enough to end it. Send me everything you have." The article came out a week later. It was devastating, thorough, and completely factual. Every manipulation Sophie had attempted, every lie she had told, every way she had twisted situations to her advantage, all of it laid out in excruciating detail. The public response was mixed. Some people still thought I was a monster, but others started asking questions. Why had Richard Chen's campaign to pressure his daughter into a potentially fatal donation been so aggressive? What other things had the Chen family lied about? What else had Sophie Lin manipulated? My father's political career took a serious hit. My mother stopped calling. And Sophie got her heart transplant from another donor. She survived, married James, and presumably lived whatever life she was going to live. And I lived. Fully, completely, on my own terms. I built my business into a success. I helped other families avoid the mistakes my parents had made. I found love eventually, real love, with someone who chose me first and meant it. I didn't reconcile with my family. There was nothing to reconcile. They had shown me who they were, repeatedly, in 2 separate lifetimes. I believed them. 10 years after I refused to donate my heart to Sophie, I was 36 years old, successful, healthy, and happy. I received a letter from Sophie. "Dear Victoria," it began, "I know I have no right to reach out to you after everything that happened, but I wanted you to know that I understand now why you said no. I've been in therapy for years, working through my behavior and the harm I caused. I realize now that I spent my entire childhood and young adulthood trying to take things from you because I was jealous of what you had: a real family, biological parents, belonging. I thought if I could take your place, I would finally feel like I belonged too. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I recognize what I did and why it was wrong. I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Sophie. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away in a drawer. I didn't respond. Some things were beyond apology, beyond forgiveness. Some things just were. I had been given a second chance at life, and I had used it to protect myself, to build something real, to refuse to be sacrificed on the altar of someone else's brokenness. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to love someone who will only use that love to destroy you. My heart was my own. My life was my own, and I intended to keep them both.